And of course, the answer might well be no, no, not really, but that that's also fine. And I've just asked you to do the physical movement of smiling. So now I'd like you to, without moving your mouth, I'd like you to think of something that gives you joy that would make you smile, but without smiling. And just feel how that moves around you, whether the act of not smiling affects that. And then let's include the physical act of smiling into your thought of joy, of happiness, and see whether that creates a different effect. So that's just a tiny kind of idea of what it is that we can do with our physical selves as we go through our world, which of course is emotional, and we're often admonished, especially us women, of being too emotional, or we shouldn't be being emotional, or our emotions are getting in the way. But actually, neuroscience has shown us that emotion goes alongside every single action, every thought has an emotional tone. Now, it might be so small an emotional tone we don't notice it, but there's no denying that. So because which is great, I think, because that means that we can look at our emotions through thinking, and we can come into our emotional life through the body as well. So I know for a lot of us these last 4 months have been rather difficult, if that's not too much of an understatement. And often when we come into areas of difficulty, of fear, of anxiety, we create physical patterns around that. And you may well know that when we're faced with some kind of threat, which dates back from our time, before modern life, where you have a tiger running after you, you've got different choices of how you react, and one of those choices in the face of fear, which I think most of us would be a bit scared if a great big tiger came up to us, is that we fight, that we run, that we pretend to be dead, or in a more modern sense, we please, we try and placate the threat. And interestingly, with all of these responses, one of the first things we do is extend ourselves upwards. And so we use our outer skeleton, outer skeleton, we only got one skeleton, we use the skeleton to draw ourselves in and up to make ourselves a little bit bigger, perhaps, to be a bit more threatening. And that would go either with fight, we want to seem big for our attacker, or in fact, even with running, in order to get the muscles innervated, we bring ourselves up and then we run. And then the next stage of this would be more of a collapse inward. So if we're freezing, it's not only our skeleton that we have to hold still, it also becomes more internal areas of ourself, the diaphragm, the chest wall, our stomach. And actually when we're facing threat, our digestive system stops working because it's not really a priority at that point. And so when we're in this alert stillness, we no longer have the full recourse to our breath that we do when we're in repose, when we're in a safe place, when we're able to relax. And what we find is, because the system is designed it's not designed to have a kind of small amount of threat all the time. It's designed to have a threat, which we resolve in one way or the other, and then we release. And I think what we lose in our modern life often is this release. So that's something that we're going to have a look at and see how we can think of those things 3 Feldenkrais. It's one medium one could use for this. Obviously, I'm a Feldenkrais teacher and a viola player. That's my background. Um, and so that's obviously my chosen, and my bias would be for this because I think it's amazing work. And it's interesting because the clients who come to me for anxiety, it's I find it extraordinary to have someone who comes in to a session or at the beginning of a series of sessions really very frozen in the way that they move. They don't move their torso, they don't move their back very much. It's like the extremities all move, but they've forgotten how to move the core. And then over a course of work, of working together to free up these more central areas of ourself, they not only find more mobility in their movement, they also find more freedom of expression, more ability to feel, and more ability to, if you like, ground themselves, find a neutral place. So in a way, that's one thing that we look for, not so much in a specific way, I would say, in Feldenkrais, but we're aiming to find a way of creating a body neutral. And this is also a really useful place for us as musicians, whether we're performing or whether we're practicing, to have a place of non-judgment that we can work from. When we feel judged, which I guess is also another emotion, or has many different emotions attached to it, we also incorporate that into our physicality. We're less likely to have the full range of our muscles if we're kind of forming any kind of defense. Because one of the things that our muscles do, they don't do much. They're on or they're off. And so that if they're turning on already, then they've got less of a range to go, if that makes sense. So rather than me just talk at you, this is, I promised, a practical session. So I'm going to ask you in a moment to I hope you've all got a mat to hand. Just before we start, there are a few guidelines. Feldenkrais is about learning, it's not an exercise. And with that in mind, your comfort is of utmost priority. So if I ask you to do something that causes you discomfort, stop. You can do it smaller, the movement. You can do it slower. You can do the movement less frequently. And you can also just not do the movement physically, but do it in your imagination. Because we're actually working with the brain, we're looking at how the brain views yourself. It's your body map within your head, within your brain. Then actually doing it is easier for us, but imagining it will also have an effect. So please, your comfort takes priority over everything else. So as we go along, I will be giving kind of rests, but you may well feel in between that you want to stop and have a pause. Please do that. That's a real request. So your reason for stopping are you're starting to get tired, or you're starting to lose concentration, or anything else that pops up as you go along. And if for some reason, because body work, because of all those things I was just talking about, for some of us, it can have an emotional overflow, if you like. And so that's another reason to stop. If you feel yourself emotionally needing to have a pause, have a break, that's a reason to stop too. Okay, so I hope that's clear for that. So I would invite you all to just start in standing. And, yep. And every Feldenkrais lesson is like a little experiment. We start with some movements or some positioning, just to see, how do you feel now, and then we'll come back to these things at the end. So, as you stand, take a moment to feel where your weight is on your feet. So an easy way of judging that you can think about, is your weight more in the front of your feet, or more on the back of the foot, your feet? Or is it spread kind of evenly over the whole front to back surface of the feet? And is it different right to left? You have a slightly different pressure on one foot than the other? And then we can also think about the inwards part of your foot as opposed to the outwards part. So do you have more weight on the inside, so someone could slip a fiver underneath the outside of your foot quite easily? Or is it more the other way around, that you've got more weight on the outside edges of your feet? Or perhaps it's somewhere in the middle? And again, is that the same for both feet, or are there differences? And one thing we're doing in Feldenkrais is we are growing your awareness. We're growing your sensitivity to notice differences. So these questions get easier the more you do. And bring your attention upwards to your ankles. What's your state of activity in the ankles? How relaxed or how busy do your ankles feel right now? And we can ask the same question of your knees. And then your hips. Do you feel like there's a lot of activity around the hips, or are they quite relaxed? Obviously the heat helps. For many of us, that's one of the reasons I like it when it's hot, because I'm much more relaxed. The heat forces my body to take over. So and then just see, where's your pelvis over your feet? So is it more towards the back of your feet, or does your pelvis feel quite even in the middle, or more to the front? And take your attention upwards to your rib cage. Is the bottom of your rib cage in front of your pelvis? And can you feel that from the inside? It's interesting, isn't it? As musicians, we spend so long being told to look in the mirror while we're singing or playing, but actually I found once I stopped doing that and started thinking more internally that things made a lot more sense, because when I'm on stage, I can't look in the mirror. I need to know how it feels inside me. And then bring your attention upwards to your shoulders. What's your sense of where your shoulders rest on top of your rib cage? Are they slightly forwards of center? Do they feel like they're coming straight out of the middle of your ribs? Well, on top of the ribs, obviously. Or are they slightly back? Another way I could ask that is, what's your sense of space across your chest? And then where's your head on top of that? Is your head in front of the shoulders, as if you were reaching forward a little with your eyes? Do you feel like your head rises out of the line of your spine? Or is it slightly backwards? And whilst you're stood there, I'd like you to bring your attention inwards into your breathing. So as we breathe in standing, our ribs go outwards, where the lungs expand outwards in all directions, and they also expand downwards towards the diaphragm, towards the pelvic floor, and upwards a little up towards your head. And as the lungs expand and contract, they're asking the same thing of all the fascia, that's all the connective tissues that isn't bone in yourself, and the bones, for your ribs to expand and contract as well. So just notice, how much movement do you feel right now? Okay. And then when you're ready, if you would come to your mat and lie down, if you could move your camera so that I can see you, that's great. Then I can give feedback if I see someone. Don't worry, I won't be saying any names, but if I see someone doing something that's not quite what I was intending, then I can give you feedback as we go along. Great. So if you would like to lie on your back with your legs long, your arms beside you. If you need something under your head and it's to hand, that's fine. And I'd just like you to take a little imprint, if you like, of how much of you makes contact with the floor. Which parts of your pelvis touch the ground? How much of your lumbar spine, that's the bottom 5 vertebrae before your ribs? How much of your thoracic spine? That's all the vertebrae that are attached to ribs. And then you're coming upwards, your shoulders. Can you measure where they are away from your spine? How much space do you have between the shoulders and the ears? And in terms of what's under your head, only have really the minimum that's required. So you don't want your head higher than is absolutely necessary. Partly because we will be moving at some point. Okay, so just take a moment in this position to sense your breathing. So as you breathe in and your lungs suck in air, how much of your ribs cage do you feel moving? Do you sense part of the front of you moving towards the ceiling? If so, where? Is it your chest that moves first? The middle of your belly? Your low belly around the pubic area? Perhaps you more feel the pressure of your ribs against the floor, changing as you breathe in and out. Or maybe it's the sides of your ribs that you feel as you expand the air into the armpits. Perhaps you feel air coming in through your nostrils, along the back of your palate, into the back of your mouth and down your throat towards the lungs. So I'd like you to begin to raise your waistband away from the floor. So the waistband for most of us is the top of your pelvis. So as if you were making a small tunnel for a mouse to slide under, and then you put it back down again. Right? And then release. So you just, and what I was saying before about being comfortable, this always applies to your movement size as well. So make the movement small to start with. In the beginning, this is only a tiny mouse. So you lift your waistband, and bring it back down. You're rolling your pelvis downwards, so your tailbone goes towards the floor at the same time. That's it. Great. And I'd like you to find a rhythm so that you can repeat this movement. So you're going to keep repeating this movement until either you get tired or I say stop. And I'm going to just guide you through. So as you roll your pelvis downwards, and you can think either about the waistband lifting or the tailbone going down, can you feel what happens in the lumbar spine? How much of your lumbar spine participates in it? And that's not to say to make it, we're just asking the question. So the movement is you just rolling your pelvis downwards and your waistband away from the floor and back. And find a size of movement where you could do this all day and not get tired. And see how each time you repeat the movement, could you do a little less? Could you make this, if you like, a more ergonomic movement? So we want your attention to be with the bones. You're moving the bone of your pelvis rather than your muscles. Your muscles will organize themselves. So and usually when we concentrate on the bones moving, on our structure, on our solidity, then that also just makes the movements easier. So as you follow this movement, how far upwards towards your shoulder girdle can you feel your spine moving? And you don't need to take notes because I'm pretty sure this is going to be available for you all afterwards. So don't feel like you can't just join in. And what happens at the back of your head? So just this arching of your low back and your pelvis, does it reach your head? Does it change how your shoulders press into the floor? Does it change your ribs, the shape of your ribs? What happens to the ribs? And you follow the movement of the ribs at the front of yourself as you gently, easily arch in this small way away from the floor. And then can you follow the back of yourself? Follow how the vertebrae get a little closer at the back when we arch the back. And the ribs get closer too. So we often think of the rib cage as something that's fixed. And indeed, when we're under threat, that is something that does get fixed pretty quickly. But I'd like you to just remember that the word cage came about before we really had metal. So cage, in the way that it was intended as a rib cage, would be closer to a basket. It would have been some kind of wooden strips that were movable. And your ribs are movable. They are highly articulated. Each rib has two joints at the back into the vertebrae and a joint into the front at the sternum. They are designed to move. And interestingly, your ribs, in terms of our evolution, were there before we used lungs to breathe. So our ribs are designed for mobility. And perhaps when we think of that, that gives us a different idea of what those ribs can do. I think it's probably a good time for a rest if you haven't stopped already. So just let go of the movement and settle back onto the floor. If it's comfortable for you, have your arms by your side, so we replicate that beginning position. And just notice, is there any difference in how you make contact with the floor now as to how you did before? And just check in with the breathing. Is there any difference in the shape of your breathing right now? And of course it's the beginning of a lesson, so the answer might be, well, not yet, I don't feel much difference. Or it might be there's a difference that you just simply don't feel yet, so that's okay too. So we're going to come back to moving, but this time I'd like you to bend both knees, so bring your feet to standing, hips width apart. And then, leaving your right knee where it is, right foot where it is, can you cross your left knee over the right? Right, lovely. And in this position, can you continue this movement of gently taking the waistband away from the floor and returning it? And feel, how does making the base of your spine and your pelvis asymmetrical change the way that you peel your back off the floor as you arch it? So you're taking your tailbone down towards the floor, you're raising your waistband, and then returning. Notice whether your head moves, and if so, where does it go? If it's not moving, are you holding it? Could it move? Let's try this on the other side. So uncross your legs, put your left leg to on the left underneath its hip, cross the right leg over the left, and come back to this gentle arching motion, taking your waistband away from the floor and returning it. Choose a speed that's easy and that's slow enough to allow you to feel the sequence of movement all the way up your spine. And that's slow enough for you to feel the changing shape of your ribs. How they extend at the front, at the bottom, and they probably close at the back in some way. Can you feel your sternum moving as well? The sternum is that band of cartilage in the front of yourself that your ribs are attached into. Does that move as you make this movement? If so, where does it go? Does it move downwards? Let go of that once more and spread your legs long on the floor as you did at the beginning. And just come back to this idea of, has anything changed? Has anything changed about the way you contact the floor? Has anything changed about the way, the shape of your breathing, in which directions your ribs move, or where you feel them move? And is there any difference in your state, your sense of calm, relaxation, however you like to put it, than at the beginning? Could you bend your knees once more and bring your feet to standing? And this time, instead of arching the back and bringing the waistband away from the floor, I'd like you to roll your pelvis upwards so that your waistband comes closer to the ground in a way. So you're rounding the bottom of yourself. And then you release, so you create like a rocking movement for yourself. A really slow rocking movement. And feel how as you roll your pelvis upwards, the vertebrae in your back and perhaps even the ribs begin to change their relationship with the floor. They perhaps start to press towards the ground. Notice if there are any areas that don't press, because often we're very good at arching the low back and we're less good at releasing it to round. So if that's true for you, you're rolling your pelvis upwards and the low back isn't rounding, just don't push it, don't force it, rather lean into that habit and ask it to arch a little as well. So you round your tailbone upwards, you're bringing your waistband towards the floor and you arch your back if that's what you're already doing. And gently, you're only adding a tiny amount, not enough to cause any strain, and in fact none of these movements should cause any strain. They should be as easy as possible. And then let go of any arching and see whether it's easier for those vertebrae to participate in the rounding of yourself. So when we try and force something out of ourselves, it's a habit, it very rarely, if ever, works. However, when we lean into a habit and we make it clearer what that habit is, then our brain has a chance to, if you like, notice it again and decide whether that's valuable or not. And so this little exercise is something that you could make into just a 5-minute exploration at any time. You could do it where you're arching, you can do it the other way as well, of course. But just to kind of notice what you habitually do, go with that. And then see whether you can release the habit by having made it more explicit. Great. So, very gently, gradually make that rounding, as long as it's comfortable for you, a little bigger. So you begin to include your feet and push with the feet in order to round yourself upwards a little. And feel the sequence as well, how when we round the pelvis, we bring the waistband or the low back closer to the floor. It asks our ribs to change their shape. You can feel that through the pressure changing, or perhaps you can sense the changing of your rib shape or where your sternum is. Is your sternum moving? Is there a change in your pressure on your head? Is your head moving? And if so, does it go up or down as you roll your bottom upwards? Great. Let go of that. Bring your legs long. And once again, just check in with how are you lying on the ground now? And what's the shape of your breathing? Is there any difference in how much of your front is able to join in? Do you feel the movement in your chest, in your belly, in your low abdomen? And if it's comfortable for you, do you have your arms by your side for this, so you have an unfettered freedom of movement of your stomach? And what's your state? What's your sense of calm? Has that changed? Bring your knees back towards the ceiling and your feet to standing. And could you interlace your fingers? Put them behind your head and behind the skull, not the neck. And bring your elbows towards each other so you make a little arm basket for your head. And I'd like you to begin to roll your pelvis upwards, and at the same time bring your elbows that are close to your head towards your knees. So you begin to lift the head just gently, only as far as is comfortable. Bring it back down as you roll your pelvis upwards. So we're making it, if you like, a C curve of your whole spine. And again, notice if there are any areas that really aren't very keen about this movement. And slow the movement down. What's really interesting to see as I watched is that as soon as we ask people to do something that's a bit more complex, more difficult, people speed up. It's almost as if to get over the difficult areas. Slow down. Stay within your comfort level, and if that's a few millimeters, that's fine. If that's a few inches, that's also fine. Get rid of a need to be perfect in any way or even achieve this. Just, it's a simple movement of bringing the elbows towards the knees as you roll your pelvis upwards. Notice what you're doing with your breathing. Do you breathe in or out as you bring your elbows downwards? Try breathing out. And feel whether when you breathe out, is there any more space for the ribs to move, to slide towards each other at the front and open at the back. And as you're rolling your pelvis upwards, you could use your stomach muscles to push more into the floor, to help this curve of your entire spine all the way from your pelvis, your tailbone, through the length of your spine to your skull. Be one thing. Great. Just rest with your hands behind your head for a moment. And then when you're ready, if you've taken them out, interlace your fingers the non-habitual way behind your head. So put your other thumb on top. Make a basket again with your hands are behind your head, you bring your elbows towards each other so your arms touch the sides of your head. This is the safest way to move your head without, for your neck. We want to keep your neck nice and safe. And this time what I'd like you to do is direct your right elbow towards your left knee. So you're lifting the head a little and you're just directing that elbow towards the left knee. So it's kind of slightly more diagonal lifting of the head. And again, do make this an easy move. Don't stay in an extended position. See whether you can make this more of a wave. Notice what your pelvis is doing. Is it moving? If it were to move, which way would be most useful? And yes, of course, most of you, of course, you're rolling your pelvis upwards, you're pushing your waistband into the floor to make this easier. Can you also exhale as you bring the two, your elbow and the knee towards each other? And we're not going across, you're not taking your elbow across, your elbow is going downwards towards the knee. So if you like, it's a diagonal folding of your torso, definitely down towards the knee rather than across towards the other breast. Let's try this on the other side. And you do pause, of course, whenever you want to. So you just gently check that you're breathing, check that you're not holding tension around your mouth or your tongue. Breathe out as you curl, as you lift the head, and you curl your left elbow towards your right knee. If it's really easy for you, can you bring your knees into the air as well? If it's not, you feel free to just leave them where they are. So you just hang your knees in the air and just alternate one elbow towards the opposite knee and the other elbow towards its opposite knee. So left elbow towards the right knee, right elbow towards, and without an idea of getting there, just in the direction. We want clarity of intention. We don't need a big movement to connect your brain up. Great. Let go of all of that. Make your legs long on the floor under your hands. Is there a difference in how you rest on the ground now? Different sense of length, perhaps? Or volume of yourself on the floor? Do you spread yourself differently? Is there a different amount of your back that makes contact with the floor? Are your shoulders resting in the same way? Or your head or your neck? Could you roll onto your right side and have your right arm underneath your head? Draw your knees upwards a little, just to give you some stability from beneath. And have your top arm, your left arm, with the hand on the floor in front of your chest for support. Yeah, that's good. And now what I'd like you to do in this position is begin very gently, very slowly, to first of all round your pelvis backwards. Allow the movement to go through all of you like a ripple, as if you're a beautiful fish swimming through water. So you've got your arm on the floor, you round yourself, come back to neutral. And then, when you're ready, begin to arch. So you alternate rounding the pelvis, taking your waistband back towards the wall behind you, coming through the middle into arching your back a little, taking your pelvis towards the front of your pelvis towards the wall in front of you. And have your legs wherever makes this easy and comfortable and gives you some support. Your head is on the floor on top of your arm, so your head and your neck are supported. That's it. Allow this to go all the way, ripple all the way up your back to your head. So it's not a quick round alternation of movement. It's a ripple one way, all the way up to your head. And again, you want your head up on your arm rather than your hand, just so you've got a straight spine. That's it. Lovely. And allow your head to move if it wants to. That's great. Yeah, support your head with something if it needs it. And allow this movement to go right from both ends of your spine. Feel the center of your spine. Feel how your sternum changes its position and your ribs change their shape as you round all of yourself and arch all of yourself. Stay within whatever range of movement is comfortable for you. And notice if there are areas of yourself that aren't joining in. It's interesting, we often have parts of our back that are very good at rounding and parts that are very good at arching. And then we have other areas that are very good at doing both. And in fact, that's what I'm encouraging in this lesson, is this ability for your spine to remember that it can move like a fish all the way through. So this ripple can go through every vertebrae, every rib. And see whether you can even it out, so it's not one part of your spine doing all the work, but all of your spine joining in. So there's no vertebrae that are on holiday and making everybody else work harder. They're all just gently joining in, and we don't get their participation by forcing, but simply by noticing what they're doing. Lovely. So when you're ready, roll onto your back with your fish spine. Bring your legs long. And how do you lie on the ground now? Is that different from the beginning of the session? We come into the movements of your breathing. How much of you participates? Some excited children outside. How much of you participates in the movement of breathing? Can you feel the expansion or contraction of your lungs inside? The air flowing through either your mouth or your nostrils, around the palate, down the throat, into the chest. Or perhaps it's the skeletal movements that you feel, the opening and closing of the ribs and the vertebrae. This vertebral movement in breathing is important for us to be able to breathe to our full capacity and to have access to whatever kind of breathing we want to make. And how much of the front of you, so all the way from your pubic bone, through the low belly, your chest, your throat, all the way up to your mouth and your face, how much of that moves now when you breathe? And what's your sense of state? Has that changed from the beginning of the session? And perhaps there's other things to notice that I haven't mentioned. That, we all have our own internal journey with each Feldenkrais lesson. It means different things to different people, and that's one of the other things I really love about this method, is it's versatile. It can fit everybody because we all move and we all breathe, and we can all improve our movement and improve what we do and how we think. So when you're ready, if you'd slowly like to roll to one side, come back up to standing. And as you reach, take your time of course, but as you reach standing, just take those few seconds to feel, is there something different about the way that you can take support from the ground through your feet? Is the pelvis in the same place as when we started, or is that different? Where's the weight over your feet? What's your sense of downwardsness of your torso? Where's your ribs over your pelvis? Where are your shoulders on top of that? Is that different? What's your sense of space between the shoulders and your ears now? And where's your head on top of all of that? take a little walk around your room, and then come back to the screen, and we'll have questions and chat. So, as you make your way back, if you'd like to just write something about how that was for you in the chat, what it was like to do it, if there was anything you experienced that surprised you, what you experienced, whether there was a difference afterwards and what those differences were, anything like that would be great to share that with us all. And then if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat and I will do my best to answer. And whilst you're writing that, let me just tell you about, if this is something that's of interest for you, how you could take it forward. So I personally run weekly classes, which you can find via my website, which is www.themovingbrain.com. I'll write that down for you. With a few colleagues, we're also doing, next week, we're doing a 4-day dive into all of this work, specifically for musicians, looking at stage presence, anxiety, and learning strategies. I will also give you, I will put that in there in the chat for you. Let me just find my little list. And if you are interested to join our little community, there's a group of us that run a Facebook group which is Feldenkrais Resources for Musicians, which would be, you're all very welcome to join. And of course, if you'd like to just know more, do email me. I've put my email in the chat as well. Yeah, hopefully you've got some questions now which I can begin to answer. Great, so some of you were more grounded and centered, felt much freer and relaxed. The breathing feels much deeper, feel more relaxed. That's great. Feel nicely stretched and relaxed. I hope that's in a good way, not the rack. So I hope you can see that even after one session, that it can have an emotional impact in terms of shifting state, feeling more relaxed, feeling calmer. That's not the only, obviously that's not the only emotion that comes up, but very often people do feel that. I know for myself, that's one of the reasons I kept coming back to classes, was I just felt better afterwards when I was doing it, that I was more in myself, more able to deal with issues and problems, and I would say that any resource that can help you feel more grounded, that can bring you back to your physical self, is something to be nurtured, really, as musicians. Because we are, our boundaries start and end at our skin, and our structure, these bones of ours, can give us a sense of certainty and safety within a changing world, so that we don't feel the need to try and make everything else stay still, but rather that we have more self-knowledge and confidence within ourselves, that we can maneuver through changing times, because that's the only thing we know is certain, that everything will change, right? I mean, so yeah, so hopefully, do you have any questions, guys? You're also welcome to unmute. Say that one more time, Fiona.
I mean, is it all revolved round your back, or does it also involve other parts of your body that you move? And
so what we were doing today was your spine, which is one of our most fundamental areas to be able to move. But actually, it's really about connecting everything. So instead of seeing ourselves as pieces, like a right shoulder or a left shoulder, or I've got a low back problem, that we start seeing ourselves as one whole. that it's a whole system. And when we shift something in one area in the system, it affects all the others. So when we have a problem, let's say somebody just wrote about a right shoulder problem, it could be something to do with that shoulder. It could also be something to do with the support structure underneath, so the ribs. Or it could be something to do with how you hold your hips. So without kind of seeing someone move, I can't obviously say, oh, it's, in my opinion, it's this or that. But the idea is that we have thousands of different lessons that we would cycle through. So let's say you decided to come to a weekly class, we cycle through different areas of ourselves in order to see how they affect us. So last week I was teaching about the tongue and sucking, and the jaw the week before that, and people found it wasn't only their mouth that was affected, it was their neck, it was how they carried their shoulders, it was what was going on in their pelvic floor or their stomach. So when we think of ourselves as one system, then that makes it easier to, if you like, to find solutions within ourselves as well. So if was asked about our 4-day dive, yeah, so this is a 4-day workshop. It's online. It's from 2 o'clock in the afternoon until 8:30. Everything will be recorded, so you don't need to come to every session. That will be available to you afterwards as well until the end of the year. And it's me with 2 of my colleagues, one of whom is a singer and vocal coach, one of whom is a flautist and flute teacher. And so we'll be looking at different areas of common problems, shoulders, etc., that people have issues with. And I think I added, did I add? Yes. I'll just add it again. So there's a bit more details about that. Yeah. There we go. So, and online classes, Julie, thanks for your question. So basically, online classes I usually recommend that people come once a week. I run 4 classes a week at different times, and I also run something called Feldenkrais on demand. So you, instead of having to come to a specific class, each week you'll have access to audio lessons. So I would recommend it as a practice. So because the more you do, the learning becomes more internalized, more your own. Let's see what else we have for questions. Your shoulders feel very uneven. That is interesting, isn't it? That when we start to become aware of what happens or what we're doing in these details, if you like, we raise our level of sensitivity and our level of intelligence, if you like, for our brain, for the body. We start to notice that we're not as symmetrical as we might think we are. And what we aim to do is not make people symmetrical, but make you do whatever it is that you need to do more successfully. So the idea that we can get rid of asymmetry totally isn't really meaningful unless that asymmetry stops you doing something. Most of us are not ambidextrous, therefore we will always have a difference in the way that we use the right side of ourselves to the left. We can train that a little to make it more even, and I would say that's a useful thing to do. We often have a dominant eye. So we'll have one eye that you can probably see for me. It's this eye. I tend to turn my head a tiny bit. If I exaggerate that, we all do this a little bit. With our dominant eye, we'll have one eye that looks a little more forwards in the room, which is fine. It doesn't really matter. That gets more important when we get a bit older, and let's say we start falling on the same side, because when we look to one side, we're shutting off an area of vision on the second side. So we need to know our habits in order to improve our function, but we're not, if you like, evening ourselves up simply for the sake of it. Does that make sense? Do you have any more questions? Anything else you'd like me to talk a bit more about? Great. Well, you're all very welcome to get in touch if you'd like to after this session. So you can either you can find me on Facebook pretty easily. It's Emma Alter Feldenkrais, and you can find me via my website, which is The Moving Brain. And my weekly classes, I've got just this week, and then I'm taking a holiday till September. But they're Monday morning at 10, Wednesday at 7, Thursday at 8, Sunday at 7. And if you're in the MU, which are probably most of you aren't, I'm also running a weekly series for them on a Friday morning. And we're hoping that perhaps the ISM might also do something and bring more of this work to you all. So it is compatible, Nicola, it's compatible with anything, with Pilates and yoga. We have some things that we would be more cautious about. But yeah, I mean, essentially it's to help you do what you want to do better. So I've given yogi people lessons on helping them with particular poses that they wanted to improve. And yes, how you join the weekly class, that's all on my website. So looks like now is probably a good time to say goodbye to you all, unless you've got any last minute questions. But thank you
very much. Really felt good.
Thank you very much. Let's unmute you all.